Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
There's nowhere out there for us to find a place to live.
Finding housing in the middle of a housing crisis. The struggle to shelter those displaced in the Gastown fire.
A misperception on parents' behalf that children, it's not really urgent to get children vaccinated.
What's to blame for why vaccinations in kids have leveled off in BC?
End up with a bit of a problem.
And a shortage of industrial land in Metro Vancouver, why it matters.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Nearly 150 people are out of their homes tonight after that massive fire tore through an historic building in Vancouver's Gastown yesterday. The structure will likely be torn down, and as investigators try to figure out what sparked the blaze, John Hernandez is speaking with tenants wondering where they'll find new places to live amid a housing crisis.
It's just hectic time right now, you know what I mean, with the fire and all that. We don't know what's going on. We lost everything. Everybody lost everything.
The destruction left behind by the flames, a reminder of all that was lost.
I was only able to grab my animals. I left yesterday in bare feet. Wearing a t-shirt, and nothing else. All my possessions are gone, my phone, my family pictures.
More than 70 residents at the Winters Hotel are out of their homes after a fire tore through the building on Monday. The cause is still unclear.
Investigation, of course, we want to leave no stones unturned. At this point in time, we don't have evidence that this was an arson. However, I want to make it clear we don't rule that out.
Those who escaped are feeling frustrated. Jeff Madison was in the building as the fire spread. He says there was little warning.
No smoke detectors, no alarm went off, no sprinklers went off. The smoke was so dark that it was unbelievable.
Fire officials say the building passed an inspection in September but could not confirm whether there were any safety malfunctions.
It's our expectations that will come out in our investigation. 2
people remain in hospital in stable condition. 1 resident is unaccounted for but believed to be alive. Meanwhile, 73 people in a building next door have been forced out because of extensive damage.
We had this very serious incident last night. At this point, it looks like we've avoided tragedy, although you might say losing 150 SRO rooms and how we're going to get those folks back on their feet and into safe, warm, dry housing is a huge challenge that I know you can see who's on the stage here. We're all united in making sure this happens.
A challenge not lost on those tenants who now find themselves in temporary shelters amid a housing crisis.
There's nowhere out there for us to find a place to live. There's no vacancies in any of these SROs. I was on a waiting list for many, many years before I had stable housing. And this is the most stable housing I've had since I moved downtown.
Those displaced say they're now eagerly awaiting promised financial supports as the city looks to find each of them new homes. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
And to another dramatic scene over the weekend when BC Ferries crew rescued 2 fishermen from a burning boat near Prince Rupert. The 2 men were rescued from a burning ship in Arthur Passage on Sunday morning. Crews and passengers saw the blaze from a distance. BC Ferries crew dropped to rescue Zodiac, and 2 members were able to rescue the fishermen. Once aboard the ship, passengers with medical training were able to help respond.
I spent 35 years in the fishing industry, and my whole family's history is from fishing, whether it was in the shore plants or on the fishing boats. And it brings back a lot of fear, because the biggest fear that anybody on a fish boat has is a fire, because there's nowhere else to go.
The Canadian Coast Guard was able to transport the 2 men from the ferry to hospital in Prince Rupert. Well, it's another month, the 17th straight month in BC, where we've seen more than 150 deaths from the toxic drug crisis. The lives being lost are often young and middle-aged men. Tonight, Anita Bathe is looking at what advocates say needs to change quickly in order to save some more lives.
174 more deaths lost to illicit drugs in BC. The province says that's 6.2 deaths per day.
And we are just seeing people, the lives being lost month after month, year after year. It is heartbreaking.
Many of those lost are young and middle-aged men. Rachel Plomadon-Asu works in overdose prevention. She's especially concerned about her Indigenous community.
The Indigenous communities, especially the rural and remote communities, there isn't the same amount of resource and money going into education and supporting the drug-using communities.
She's calling for more overdose prevention sites and outreach teams across BC.
They're dying 6 people a day. Like, they're nothing. Like, they don't matter. These are people's sons, daughters, husbands, you know?
In 2022, Vancouver, along with the Thompson Cariboo and Northern Interior regions, are seeing the highest death rates. In a statement, BC's Minister of Mental Health and Addiction says it's heartbreaking to see the lives lost and that the province won't stop working until we turn this crisis around. While the number of deaths is down from January, illicit fentanyl is still the major substance found in post-mortem testing, followed by other toxic drugs.
The prevalence of benzodiazepines, which is also added to the fentanyl, which is already dangerous as it is. You can really get a small amount in any kind of drug you're using, and it can be lethal, especially if people have never tried it before.
And advocates say the crisis is hurting people from all walks of life.
People who are working in trades, people who have spent some time maybe in a recovery program of some kind and are relapsing.
While more users are checking drugs and visiting overdose prevention sites, advocates say it's not enough. And if supports don't increase at a faster rate everywhere, the outlook will remain grim. Anita Bathe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, not so great news for saltwater swimmers. Kitsilano pool will not be reopening this summer.
No Kits pool is an absolute favourite for so many Vancouverites every summer. But to keep everybody safe, we really need to take the time to do the assessment and the necessary repairs.
The pool was badly damaged during January's storm and king tides. Initially, there were hopes the pool could open in time for summer, but when staff inspected the pool, they realized the full extent of the damage. To help offset the loss, the Parks Board is opening Second Beach and New Brighton pools earlier in the mornings. Well, in a historic first in the province, the Simpcw First Nation has signed a co-created child welfare agreement in BC. Now the nation will have its unique practices, laws, and traditions integrated into the agreement. That agreement, called Twaset Mentem, means walking together. It will ensure the Simpcw First Nation is involved in the protection and placement of Simpcw children who come into contact with the child welfare system.
Gone are the days of just swooping in and removing children from the families. It's going to be an integrated approach between our Simpcw Social Development Department and our appointed representatives in the Ministry of Child and Family Services to ensure that less disruptive measures are taken, that the best interests of the children are considered.
The Simpcw considers this an interim measure as they work to exercise their inherent jurisdiction and legislative authority in relation to their children and families. Well, the rate of kids vaccinated against COVID-19 in BC has leveled out over the past few weeks at 57%. BC is now lagging far behind the rate of almost every other Canadian province. Experts say it's not clear why parents aren't vaccinating their kids. But as the CBC's Michelle Gussoub reports, mixed messaging from the province could be contributing to the problem.
Bree Cropper's oldest daughter was keen to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Still, she was nervous about the side effects of a new vaccine.
We discussed it, my husband and I, and asked her to hold off for a short bit so that we could sort of watch the safety signals coming out of the States.
But by the time her younger daughters were eligible, she didn't need any convincing.
And we had them vaccinated the very first day. We were first in line. And So with them, it was kind of a no-brainer.
Not all parents in BC have come to the same conclusion. BC's vaccination rate among kids has leveled off in recent weeks. Only 57% of kids 5 to 11 have had one dose. In contrast, 89% of teens 12 to 17 have been vaccinated. And it's hard to know why.
I think with the younger children, we're now at a point where there's less concern from a lot of people. There's more vaccinated people overall in the community.
Throughout the pandemic, BC health officials often repeated that schools are safe and kids unlikely to spread COVID-19. Experts say that message could now be backfiring.
I think some of the messaging around COVID has also, and likely inadvertently, but contributed to a misperception on parents' behalf that children, it's not really urgent to get children vaccinated.
The only province with a lower child vaccination rate than BC is Alberta. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, where COVID vaccines were administered in schools, the number is 85%. And though COVID-19 is often mild in children, it's not without risk.
But there are still some children who have a serious infection. We can't always predict who that's going to be. Some children get rare complications that can last weeks or months. And ultimately, these vaccines are extremely safe for children.
The province says it hasn't changed how it plans on boosting BC's numbers, but no matter your reason for getting jabbed.
Our 10-year-old, she wanted to be vaccinated to be a part of the bubble that was protecting all the immune compromised and the elderly. And our 7-year-old, she wanted to be a superhero with it.
Experts say every vaccine will help limit future waves. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Okay, so this is pretty cool. New technology is coming to Skytrain. It's the first of its kind to be set up in North America. Yeah, those tunnels when you're heading downtown will no longer be pitch black. TransLink has installed full motion advertising videos that will display on the train's windows. Take a look. This is the TELUS ad that will pop up when you enter the tunnel. The system uses sensors that detect incoming trains to automatically display the ads. The futuristic technology is used in South America, Asia, and Europe. Each tunnel advertising system is made of 360 vertical LED lights. Well, wild weather today for much of the lower mainland and the island. The latest surprise spring system to roll through, dumping rain, sleet, and in some places, snow. Of course, this is all after we had sun just yesterday and I think earlier this morning as well. Gold River on the North Island was hit hard. Drivers struggling with dangerous conditions on the road, and scenes more at home, usually in late January. And as you can tell, East Van was among many neighborhoods that saw hail today. It's the second time since Sunday. Drivers, pedestrians, and really anyone outside has had to contend with a sight rarely seen in April. Yeah, I can attest to that. I definitely got caught in the hail. I had to run from my car into a store this morning. It was pretty wild.
It was intense, Anita. Yeah, hail, snow, sun, as you mentioned, everything but the kitchen sink today. The weather bingo. I hope everyone was playing today. Just wild. I want to take you actually to our tower cam to show you just a snapshot of the afternoon. There we go. Some rain that was likely bringing snow to higher elevations. We had some convective thunderstorms through the day that also led to lightning strikes, and that led to hail. And we continue to see all of those happening across the South Coast as we speak. It's hard to find, you're hard pressed to say, to find a meteorologist to say that this is totally unprecedented when you talk about any weather event, but this is rare for April. I will say that. Here's what the satellite and radar look like right now. As I mentioned, we are still getting everything as that air is drawn towards a rotating low sitting off the coast right now. It's a cold low in our upper atmosphere, and that contrast between 9 degrees on the surface temperatures in the strait, that's what's leading to lightning strikes as we speak across the island. The blue and the purple is the snow still falling. And yes, we're still getting downpours as well. Now, it's not quite over. We're still looking at this sort of setup through the next couple of hours. Temperatures have also been cold. 6 is the warmest we've seen all day, coming down to a 2 overnight tonight. And just taking you through that overnight, again, still looking at a chance of a shower through the late evening hours, but things are looking to clear tomorrow. I'm not saying we're getting the temperatures back, but definitely a lot more sun and a lot less weirdness. I'll put it that way, Anita.
Okay, I'll take that. That's fine. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Time now to take a look at our search for BC's best small town. It's a battle between the East Coast versus West Coast on Vancouver Island. Ucluelet and Hornby Island go head-to-head for that coveted Final Four spot. Now, our Justin McElroy has a tough job today. He's been on Hornby Island at the beach. And Justin, I know you love this reference, but many call Hornby Island the Hawaii of the North, don't they?
Yeah, that's what some people call it. A little bit colder here, though. There's more to Hornby Island than just Tribune Bay. Of course, there's a wonderful town square, a lot of wineries, beautiful bucolic setting. It is this beach that really draws people in. There's no one here right now, but in the summertime, Hornby Island's population goes from about 1,000 people to about 7,000 people being here every day. Now, that can cause a lot of strain, both for ferries and people who live here full time. I spoke with a couple that are opening up the brewery on the island, and they say that it's a fine line of keeping that balance.
But there's always been a history of travelers and people coming through Hornby and coming to see its natural beauty. So that still is going to happen, whether we like it or not. And I hope that, you know, we can just keep it kind of
on a small, respectful scale.
Yeah,
that's the main goal, right? Is to make sure everybody is gentle with the island.
Yeah.
Of course, you speak to 10 people on Hornby Island, you'll get 10 different answers about where that balance of growth and people coming in is. But the question today is, can it beat Ucluelet in the quarterfinals of the search for BC's best small town? You look at the tail of the tape, Ucluelet a bit more people, Hornby Island, the average age a little bit older, but right now it is Ucluelet dominating by quite a bit, actually. It's been doing well the entire competition, so it looks like it'll move on unless there's a late surge of boats. Hornby Island, of course, still a lovely place. I imagine that some residents here might be pleased that they don't go too far in this competition, can lay low under the radar a little bit while longer.
No kidding. Justin, thank you so much. Oh. A manhunt in New York for the suspect after a horrific attack on a subway station. Dozens are hurt, how it happened, and the bigger question, why? Coming up. Thanks for joining our commercial-free live stream. Well, if you've ever found yourself in Halifax or you plan to go in the near future and you're looking for a quick way to get around downtown, an electric scooter may be an option. And as Felicia Chandler tells us, changes to the province's Motor Vehicle Act mean you might soon be able to pick them up everywhere.
Closely resembling the kids' kick scooter, popularized in the 90s, but reaching up to 45 kilometers per hour, electric scooters or e-scooters are slowly being adopted by people all over the world as an environmentally friendly mode of transportation. And Nova Scotia is no exception. This is Max Rastelli, the owner of Segway Nova Scotia and HFX e-scooters. Rastelli helped introduce Halifax to e-scooters in 2019 and has since had thousands of people rent them out. Now, he says thanks to the new e-scooter regulations being added to the province's Motor Vehicle Act, it won't be long before they're everywhere.
Perhaps next year or some point in the future, I would expect to see more operators in the city and competition in the city. And if the likes of Bird and Lime and Uber, let's say, if they move into Halifax, you're going to see thousands of scooters on the streets.
The province's Department of Public Works announced earlier this week that e-scooters will soon be allowed on municipal roads. Prior to the recent amendments, the Motor Vehicle Act made no mention of e-scooters. The new amendments also include helmet laws, a minimum age of 14 to use e-scooters, as well as a maximum speed of 32 kilometers per hour. Dr. Michael Schwand is a doctor with Vancouver Coastal Health who has worked on e-scooter programs in his area. He says outlining clear safety precautions such as not driving e-scooters while intoxicated and designating specific riding locations is key when creating legislation.
I think consultation between different parts of government with health programs is very important. We can create education materials, we can share information on what the actual risks are that have been seen.
The amendments are currently going through the legislative process, and the province did not say when they will officially take effect. Felicia Chandler, CBC News, Halifax.
A manhunt is underway in New York tonight after an attack at a subway station in Brooklyn. And a warning, this story contains graphic images. It happened during the busy morning commute. Police say a man wearing a gas mask. They say he fired 33 times. 10 people were shot. 5 are in critical but stable condition. Now, a person of interest has now been identified, and police are saying they are narrowing in on a suspect. Paul Hunter now on a day of fear and panic. And one more warning for you that this story also contains disturbing images.
Morning rush hour, underground in Brooklyn. Suddenly, with smoke in the car ahead and a banging noise, possibly someone trying to escape, as passengers here moved away, frightened and confused. When it pulled into the next station, they all poured out from both cars. Smoke, panic, and blood now everywhere.
There was blood on the floor. There was a lot of blood trailing on the floor. All I saw were people trampling each other, trampling over each other, trying to get through to the door, which was locked, and there's just a lot of panic.
Witnesses say a man dressed as a construction worker had put on a gas mask, set off a smoke canister, and began shooting, striking multiple people.
There was a young man who came up to the station booth, which was some yards away from me, and he was bleeding from the legs.
I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I just got off the train. I stayed by some police officers, and I hope for the best.
I saw a lot of people coming out of the train station, screaming, yelling for help. I saw a lady, she was shot right in her leg.
She was shot in her leg?
Yeah, and she was screaming for help.
No one knew what was going on, who was shooting, or why. Police said later it could have been much worse. Consider what they found at the scene.
We had 33 discharged shell casings, 15 bullets, 5 bullet fragments, 2 detonated smoke grenades, 2 non-detonated smoke grenades, a hatchet.
My fellow New Yorkers.
New York's new mayor, Eric Adams, who campaigned pledging to fight crime, could not visit the scene, having just tested positive for COVID. He sent these words.
We're praying for all New Yorkers who were injured or affected by today's attack.
That's the CBC's Paul Hunter reporting tonight. Now let's turn to the war in Europe, where Russia is facing new and disturbing allegations of chemical warfare against Ukraine. The CBC's Katie Simpson has the details on an international investigation that's underway, claiming a Russian drone may have dropped a toxic substance on the southern city of Mariupol.
In the ruins of Mariupol, investigators are trying to determine whether Russian forces have changed tactics, whether they've used chemical weapons in their assault on this southern port city where thousands have already been killed. The president isn't saying yet whether the allegations have been proven true, only that he's aware Russia is considering deploying chemical weapons. They are preparing for a new stage in their terror against us, Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly address. We take the allegations very seriously. Russia has failed to meet any of its military objectives, abandoning its bid to take the capital. Advances in the south and east have been deadly and chaotic. Still, President Vladimir Putin remains defiant. During a rare public visit to Russia's space agency, he insisted Russian military efforts will be successful, dismissing allegations of war crimes as fake. The objectives are clear and the objectives are noble, he says, adding that peace talks are at a dead end. Hundreds of kilometers from the front lines, Ukrainians are learning new skills to help with the war effort. Valentina is a 17-year-old student sewing first aid kits for Ukrainian soldiers. I cannot be on the front line, she says. This is my contribution. Mariana is a teacher who brings her own younger kids to this school. She's too afraid to leave them at home alone in case an air raid siren goes off. I don't even know what to tell you, she says. One day I'm crying, the next I'm working, then I have some hope. I have mixed feelings because I worry for my kids and my husband. I worry about my country. Attacks here in western Ukraine are rare. When the air raid sirens sound, there's no major panic anymore. But when you speak with people, there is a real fear that the relative calm could be disrupted at any moment. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Lviv.
Vancouver's tech industry is getting a major boost from Google. The tech giant is starting to build an underwater fiber optic cable. It's going to be connecting BC and Japan. Now they're calling it the Topaz cable, and it's the size of a garden hose. It's being laid right on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, and it will have stations in Vancouver and Port Alberni, two prefectures of Mie and Ibaraki. For more on this project, we're joined by tech expert Gray Williams. Thanks for being with us.
I was glad to be here.
Gray, it's a small, I guess, in width, but very long cable that'll stretch across the Pacific Ocean. So how does this actually work for someone who knows nothing about tech and fiber optics?
It's a big pipe. And I mean, this is a big pipe that's also very, very fast. I think we're looking at something like 240 terabits per second, pardon me. So they basically got 16 cables, fiber optic cables that are basically shunting data back and forth from Japan to Canada. Google was saying it was something like 4.5 million 4K streams of the same YouTube video could be played simultaneously on this. That's a lot of data.
Wow, okay, no kidding. So why has Google chosen BC and Japan?
Well, honestly, proximity, like looking at where we are, basically getting data across the Pacific Ocean, we're the best suited for it. And so Port Alberni is the choice here. It's the city that's going to be our exit. We also have had infrastructure that's been there in the past. So basically this is plugging into some infrastructure that we had before that we're able to reuse. This is something going back to the 60s, but it's now we're actually able to use it again.
Vancouver is often touted as one of the biggest emerging tech hubs in North America. So how will this Topaz cable help usher in the next stage of internet technology and perhaps some bigger companies?
For sure. Well, looking at Vancouver, Web3 has been a massive surge here in the city. We got groups like the Frontier Collective and by Blink, my own agency, that are really kind of starting to lead the way there. This cable is essentially going to give us the platform that we need to be able to connect to the world for a lot of these new decentralized services. When you're looking at things that we've had in the past, Google, Amazon, Facebook, they've run those servers and basically they've had those networks built for themselves specifically. Google's built something here that's going to actually help them, but they're also giving us the infrastructure to be able to run other things like decentralized web in the future.
Okay, and just quickly before we let you go, can you talk about what goes into building something like this, all the way from the construction and laying it down, but also the environmental concerns of putting something like that on the ocean?
For sure. I mean, looking at that, we've got decades of cable building technology dating back to pre-World War II, where basically we're looking at this and saying this is a fiber optic cable. So it's an incredibly fast cable, but it's using glass fiber. And so that cable itself has to be very carefully constructed. It's difficult to work with. Terminating these cables is famously hard. If you ask any TELUS rep in the area, they will tell you that very easily. So looking at this and making sure that this cable doesn't corrode, making sure that it doesn't leach out into the environment is something that was thought of when they were building these. Like I said, we've been building these since the 60s. So I think we've got a pretty good hang on the technology now, but this looks like we're going to be set for quite some time.
Yeah, and since the 60s, we do have one from here to Honolulu. So Gray Williams, thank you so much for being with us today, tech expert from the agency Blink.
My pleasure.
They have names like Brewery Row and the Distillery District, but it's not just alcohol that links these residential neighborhoods. They were once industrial zones. Why the fact that they aren't anymore is a big problem. Next.
Around this room could bring back a lot of memories for some people. Artifacts of a way of life that used to be. Most of this stuff was borrowed from the hotel by patrons and will be returned to them when the celebration is over.
We did it because we didn't have any historic treasures. All the old invitations, all the old menus, all the old pictures, we couldn't find any of it. So we thought we have to get this memorabilia back. We have to have something to show the public in to celebrate our 50 years.
Remember the old ice buckets? Or the flask a gentleman wore on his hip? The visits by kings and queens who always stayed in the royal suite? And personalities of the day? Clark Gable, who posed while playing golf. Babe Ruth, who left his signature. Gene Tunney, who hosted a dinner to raise money to commemorate the Landy Bannister Miracle Mile. Bob Hope, who's been here so often he should have a permanent room. And Del Richards, who still plays great music, pictured here with longtime manager Art Cameron.
Everything we've seen here was used in the hotel at one time or another, but possibly the best part was the bill. For 2 people, back in 1941, it was $5.50 a night. Dinner in the room was $1.50. A telephone call was 10 cents, and miscellaneous charges amounted to 50 cents. Just about the same amount totaled as you'd pay just for the tax today. Oh, for the days, at least back in 1941. Bob Gillingham, CBC News, at the Hotel Vancouver.
It started out as a weekend hike on the mountain, but it ended up as 6 days in a tent trapped in the snow on British Columbia's Mount Seymour. Today, the happy ending to what could have been a tragedy. Jerry Thompson reports.
On Good Friday, when the hikers went up Mount Seymour, the weather was beautiful. But by Easter Sunday, when they were supposed to return, a spring storm had swept in from the coast and dumped enough snow to stop them in their tracks somewhere beyond the ski slopes in deep wilderness. Fortunately, they were experienced and wise enough to stay put while the search crews combed the back trails. Nevertheless, bad weather stalled the search and kept the 3 hikers inside a tiny tent for 4 extra days and nights. A rescue team brought them out in a blizzard just after lunchtime today.
Howdy, folks.
After a short talk with officials and a hot lunch, the missing hikers emerged to face an avalanche of cameras and some very happy relatives.
Here's the person who's most glad to see me, I think. The first couple nights were pretty rough because the wind was blowing. And last night wasn't too bad. We got some sleep. It's a beautiful mountain, but I don't know, it's too easy to get trapped.
So the story has a happy ending. What's ironic is that you could come so close to tragedy on a mountainside that is within sight of a city of 1.5 million people. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, North Vancouver.
Cities often redevelop warehouses and factories into residential and retail areas. And while they can be cash bonanzas for developers and city finances, they aren't always a big one. In this latest from Yute Lee's series About Here, he takes a look at a growing problem, a shortage of industrial space.
There's a neighborhood in New Westminster, British Columbia that I think is a bit strange. It's called the Brewery District. You can't miss it. Its name is proudly printed on signs, flags, and spelled out in big block letters. But there's a key thing missing in New Westminster's Brewery District. The breweries. There's not a single one. There's an insurance broker, a freshie, a poke bar, but the only thing brewing here is coffee. Well, I think there's something else brewing here too. Trouble. Such a bad line. The Brewery District was once home to an actual brewery, the Labatt Brewery, makers of Budweiser, Bud Light, and other respectable beverages. But in 2004, the building was closed and then later redeveloped into this brewery-free brewery district. Now, the problem isn't that this neighborhood is essentially a lie or that my Budweiser now comes from the other side of the province. No, the problem lies with what this neighborhood replaced: industrial land. That is land reserved by local governments for large and loud businesses, like factories, warehouses, and breweries. These are businesses that people typically want far away from their homes, so it makes sense to have areas set aside for them. But recently, more and more cities have been redeveloping industrial lands. Safeway's warehouse in Burnaby, now about to become 20 apartment buildings with shops and restaurants. This warehouse in Halifax, bulldozed to make way for an apartment complex with shops and restaurants. And Mr. Christie's Cookie Factory in Toronto, once known for Oreos and Chips Ahoy, it'll soon be known for 15 apartment towers with a mix of condos, offices, a new park, and of course, shops and restaurants. This is such a common occurrence that many have described it as a crisis. Okay, hold on. A crisis? Really? There are many crises out there. The housing one, the climate one, and my existential one. But since when did we care so much about warehouses? What's so wrong about turning industrial lands into this? Shops and housing? It's a fair point. We actually have a long history of building over industrial lands in North America. Case in point, False Creek in Vancouver. It was once an industrial district at the heart of the city, with sawmills, warehouses, and train tracks. But in the 70s, False Creek began to transform into a residential neighborhood. Today, those lands hold some of the hottest waterfront real estate in the city. Instead of sawmills and warehouses, there are glass condos with dog parks and the seawall. Of course, people love it. But this isn't just about looks, it's also about money. Building housing and shops on industrial land is incredibly profitable for developers and generates tons of new taxes for local governments.
Get on my level, get on my level. I'm too fly, up too high, get on my level.
It's good old-fashioned capitalism mixed with new urbanism. We get rid of smokestacks, build trendy new neighborhoods, and make way more money. But repeat that over and over again over several decades, and you end up with a bit of a problem. In many cities today, there is barely any industrial land left at all. For example, this is all the industrial land in Metro Vancouver, and this is what is left over for any new industries. Tiny little pockets and slivers here and there. But at the same time, industrial land is kind of a hot commodity right now. First off, there are a ton of new businesses looking for industrial spaces. For example, you have food processing companies like vegan cheese producers and chocolatiers. Then there are biotech labs, welding shops, film studios, even artisan jewelry makers, and that's just to name a few. But some of the largest demand right now is coming from the shipping and logistics industry. The rise of e-commerce and global trade has created a huge demand for spaces that manage the flow of goods. More port terminals to unload containers off ships, and way more warehouses to store and sort those goods. And recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has put that demand into overdrive. Lockdown measures around the planet have caused huge disruptions to global trade. So now, companies are looking to stockpile their goods so they don't have to rely so much on these supply chains. That will require way more warehousing space, which will require way more industrial land. But finally, caught in the middle of all that are industries that are actually quite essential to the functioning of a city. For example, when you take out your recycling, it goes to a recycling depot on industrial land. When you flush your stuff, it goes to a sewage treatment plant on industrial land. And if you got milk, you can thank the dairy processing plant, which you can find on... You getting the idea? All of that is vying for the little industrial land we have left, and it's getting cramped. With a few exceptions, most major industrial centers across Canada are near vacancy rates of 1%. Basically, any industrial space that can be rented out is already full, and that has resulted in skyrocketing rents. This is how much industrial rents have increased in just the last 3 years. In cities like Toronto, it's up by more than 60%. So what does that all actually mean? What does having an industrial land shortage look like on the ground? Well, it's difficult to say for certain, but we've begun to notice some patterns. First off, industrial businesses either leave a city or avoid setting up there in the first place. This is really apparent in a place like Vancouver. Its ports manage almost half the shipping containers coming in and out of the country, but many of the warehouses that process those goods are actually located in Calgary, like the main warehouses for Walmart, Home Depot, Canadian Tire, and Rona. So if you buy something from any of these stores in Vancouver, your item was most likely shipped in through the Port of Vancouver, brought to a warehouse in Calgary, then trucked back to Vancouver. And the reason why is quite simple. Calgary has the industrial land available and Metro Vancouver does not. But those are businesses that are able to relocate elsewhere. For businesses that serve the local population, it's more likely that they just shut down. A common example is car repair shops. People still very much use their services, but many increasingly find themselves unable to keep up with the skyrocketing rents of industrial areas. The last pattern I want to mention isn't so much about businesses, but about the people working in them. It's worth noting that industrial lands tend to offer opportunities for those outside the service and knowledge economy, and these are typically well-paying jobs. In fact, studies have found that industrial lands hold a much higher concentration of middle-income jobs compared to a city's average. So with that, many are concerned that redeveloping those industrial lands is contributing towards the growing income inequality within our cities. In the last several decades, major cities across Canada have all reported more people living in poverty, more wealthy people, and a shrinking middle class. Now, in some ways, this is a bit of a dilemma because, let's face it, many cities today are also in a housing crisis. They do need to build new housing somewhere, right? So I think you could see this as a tough but necessary pill to swallow. Maybe we do need to develop over some of our industrial lands. But I'm not so convinced by that. It's important to remember that cities have tons and tons of land set aside for just houses. They're called single-family neighborhoods, and they are abundant in pretty much every city in North America. For example, in Metro Vancouver, this is all the land we've set aside for this kind of neighborhood. If we're talking about where we could add more housing, it's precisely these areas that I think we should be looking at first. But efforts to add more housing into single-family neighborhoods are almost always met with an outcry of resistance. Homeowners protest that new apartments will change the character of their neighborhoods, among other concerns. But if someone proposes building an apartment on industrial land, it's much less likely that there'll be public backlash. I think that makes you see the industrial land crisis a bit differently. We're losing industrial land not because we have to, but because it's the politically convenient thing to do. And for me, that points to a larger issue. Cities have limited amounts of land and many legitimate uses that compete for it, like housing, shops, and industry. And as cities grow, we have to carefully consider what we prioritize and why. But I think our priorities are often skewed by a very idealized aesthetic of what we like about our cities. You tend to see it on tourist blogs, social media, and real estate ads. That aesthetic rarely includes industrial lands. And I get it. It's hard to get excited about a warehouse or a sewage treatment plant. In fact, I would wager that most of us are very comfortable with those things being out of sight and out of mind. But while industrial lands might not always be the most trendy, Instagrammable thing, it will always play a critical role in supporting our cities. And I think reminding ourselves of that fact is the first step towards solving any industrial land crisis.
You better straighten up and treat me right. You can see here. Cool, let's do it, yeah. You better tell the other girls goodbye.
And we're seeing this as an issue as we push further east in our province as well. Surrey facing a real shortage, as well as other cities, again, as we go further east. Jokingly, it's known as winter peg, but it's safe to say even this spring snowstorm is a bit, well, overwhelming. Why they're calling it one for the record books next. And at 6:43, a live look tonight at Grouse Mountain. Plenty of snow up high and no sign that the winter is winding down yet. Down low, the word of the day was weird. So is it set to stay? Johanna has her forecasts next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. The Surrey Board of Trade's Top 25 Under 25 Awards returns on April 20th. Celebrate Surrey's role models and get your tickets today at businessinsurrey.com. And have you had your say in the search for BC's best small town? Join us and channel your provincial pride and cast your vote weekdays at cbc.ca/bestsmalltownbc.
Landslides and floods triggered by heavy rains have killed more than 40 people in central and southern Philippines. Officials say searches are ongoing for dozens of people still reported missing. More than 100 others were hurt when remote villages were hit by walls of mud and debris. Treacherous sludge and continuing rains have only made rescue efforts more challenging. Authorities say about 30,000 families have been displaced. The Philippines usually sees at least 20 storms and typhoons every year, mostly during rainy season, which starts in June. Now, forecasters are using words like major and significant to describe a spring storm heading to parts of southern Saskatchewan and Manitoba tonight. It's expected to bring as much as 50 centimeters of snow to some areas. Now, the weather has already prompted the NHL to cancel tomorrow night's game in Winnipeg. Karen Pauls has more on how people are bracing for the blizzard.
This is the Trans-Canada Highway between Winnipeg and the Saskatchewan border, and these are the barricades that will be closed when the storm hits. Environment Canada says southern Manitoba should expect freezing rain, up to 50 centimeters of snow, and high winds that will cause deep drifts.
Climate change is certainly a factor. You can't point to one storm, one event, one period of time, like one season, and say, this is directly related to climate change. But of course, it is a factor.
People are already stocking up on food, batteries, and whatever supplies they'll need for a couple of days.
It was really busy. I was in line for quite a while, and it just felt panic buying. I just felt, and there's lots of stuff they're out of.
Manitoba Hydro is already preparing for power outages across the province, from Saskatchewan all the way to the Ontario border. The province says people should stay off the roads once they're closed.
There's going to be semi-trucks that are needing to go. It's just keeping our highways safe and letting those semi-trucks go, because they're essential service when it comes to supplying goods and services.
One consolation, the province isn't expecting major flooding. With temperatures below freezing, the swollen rivers will have a few more days to subside before all the new snow starts to melt. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Brandon, Manitoba.
Let's bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Joe, where are we at with that blizzard now?
Anita, it's really just getting started, but snow is accumulating and winds are picking up for southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba. And we are hearing from RCMP that they will be closing all major highways in southern Manitoba around midnight in anticipation of the near zero visibility. And that closure may in fact extend through to Wednesday afternoon. Let me show you what it looks like on the satellite and radar right now. The radar is pushing that snow northward. We're starting to see it accumulate just south of the border, North Dakota, full on blizzard conditions. So you can see the slew of warnings, including winter storm warnings, and those areas outlined in black and filled in red. That's the full on blizzard warning. So the 50 centimeters of snow plus those 90-kilometer-per-hour winds that will lead to these kinds of snow totals. And now that the storm is underway, we have high confidence that we will be looking at pockets of snow over 50 centimeters, 60 to 80 centimeters, not out of the question. And that's why this one will be rivaling the 1997 storm. But as we heard from Karen on the ground, luckily it will remain cold, so not expected to see that rapid melt, but they are in for the long haul. And I promise I didn't start with Manitoba to soften us up before I get back to the snow on the West Coast. It is wild for both Manitoba and BC. This is unusual for us. We're just not getting quite those amounts. The snow is still possible in the next couple of hours, but more likely we'll see a stray shower or thunderstorm as those temperatures drop, though, keeping the risk in for some wet snow tonight. Through Wednesday and Thursday, much more of a mix of sun and cloud story across the province. You can see sunshine for the coast, Prince Rupert, you deserve that, Dease Lake as well, but temperatures still cool, just a 7 for Kelowna tomorrow. Seasonals for this time of the year, based on our last couple decades of averages, 14 for places like Kelowna, and a 14 in through Vancouver as well. So well below in the next few days. And I don't see a huge jump up in temperatures in the long range. It will feel warmer tomorrow. Tomorrow night into Thursday, we may get clipped with some precip, and down at that 2-degree mark, that may come as some wet snow. Much more stable for Thursday. Looks like we see showers return for Friday in the middle of the day. At this point, the long weekend looking not too shabby, but Monday is the first seasonal temperature I see in our full 10-day forecast, Anita. So our cold spring continues, but at least I don't have hail in this long-range forecast.
Just a little bit of rain.
Exactly.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, she's made it her goal to make her backyard a welcoming place for all creatures, great and small. Why biodiversity is the key, and Albertan woman's tips and tricks next.
So for getting your bike out in the spring, it's obviously, your tire pressure may have, gone a little low over the winter, so definitely want to make sure your tires are inflated properly. When you inspect your tires in the spring, have a good look at them. Sometimes rubber can dry and the tire wall can actually crack. So if your tire is showing indications of cracking or significant wear, that'd be an indication it's time to get a new tire. Proper chain lubricant to help all the moving parts work properly. If your chain is rusty, then obviously we don't want that. We want to use a very thin bicycle oil to help lubricate it, and definitely clean. Like the bike should be clean. Sometimes people utilize too heavy of an oil and it attracts a lot of dirt and mud. That's not good for the drivetrain components. So have a clean inspection of the bike, and then of course check your brakes and your shifting and make sure that that they're working properly. As far as the brakes go, gears, do the cables work? Are they rusted? Is everything seized? So we want to make sure that the brakes and gears are working properly. And it's also a good idea to squeeze your brakes really, really firmly at the start to make sure that they're operating properly and that the cable isn't going to slip. And over the winter, sometimes cables can stretch just sitting there. So if the cable tension is not exactly right, then the gears won't work properly. If you need any assistance, feel free to come into one of our stores and we can certainly have a quick look at the bike for you and give you an assessment if it needs a tune-up or not.
Nick Mercer has been studying wind power for more than a decade. So when he heard the 15-year moratorium on development of wind power was over, he was pleased. But he said the timing of the announcement was suspect.
In the short term, I'm very pleased that the path is easing for wind energy development here in the province. But in the long term, I'm very extremely concerned about the decisions we continue to make collectively and how that's setting us up for the tensions that's creating for the massive transformational change we need to ensure a climate-safe future.
In recent weeks, groups in the province have replaced fossil fuels with the word energy. The Industry Association, formerly known as the Newfoundland and Labrador Oil and Gas Industry Association, has been rebranded. And the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, or the CNLOPB, which was created in 1996 as part of the Atlantic Accord, will now be called the Energy Board.
Sure.
Retired politician Kevin Aylward is part owner of Biothic Energy, who are hoping to develop offshore wind in the Bay St. George area.
This can be a job creator, a private sector investment, capital coming into the province that can create brand new jobs here.
Aylward is hoping to see wind power development in the Bay St. George area in the near future. Troy Turner, CBC News, Pasadena.
I don't know about you, but I sure am interested in getting more visitors with feathers into my outdoor space. Are you hoping to make your yard a haven for native plants and animals? Yeah, I'm into that. An Alberta woman has spent the last decade working on that, and she has some tips for anyone who wants to do the same. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Melissa Penny. I'm a bird enthusiast. I've had 90 species of birds visit my Edmonton backyard in the last 3 years, and I'm going to show you how you can also increase the biodiversity in your backyard. Planting native plants is the best way to bring biodiversity to your yard. They attract beneficial insects, they're inexpensive to buy. You also won't be babysitting native plants all summer through a drought because they're meant to be here and that they're used to that. One of the ways you can increase biodiversity is by creating a brush pile. So I take twigs like this that blow off my trees, and I keep adding to the pile so that birds have a safe place to hide from predators and from roaming cats. When you're planting, you want to make sure you're keeping density in mind. The birds don't want to travel long distances between plants or trees to reach their destination, in which this case is the bird bath. So what I've done is I've planted along the fence line at varying heights and close together. So we have small ground-loving plants, bigger perennials, shrubs, small trees, and then finally large trees like this elm. Another way you can increase biodiversity is by having fresh water for birds in your backyard. So what you can see in these bird baths is they have natural things like twigs and rocks, and they're very shallow. So you need to make sure that you're keeping this really fresh. So you only want to put out as much water as you can maintain, and then you'll have some happy bathing birds to enjoy in your yard. Feeding birds in your yard is a very enjoyable pastime. It can also be tricky business. If you're just putting out a mixed food in a tray feeder, you're probably going to end up with an overwhelming amount of invasive species like house sparrows or European starlings. You might wonder why it would be an issue to feed invasive species. House sparrows and European starlings are also cavity nesters like a lot of our native birds, and they take away those cavities that are already at a premium in a city habitat. So what we want to make sure is we're keeping those populations down while bringing up our native bird population.
Okay, that's it for our show tonight. And just before we go, we have some breaking news to share. Vancouver fire crews say they're on the scene of a deadly crash involving a fallen tree in South Vancouver. They say it appears the tree hit at least one vehicle on Marie near Kerr earlier this evening. Now, it's not known if anyone else is hurt, but Dan Burritt will be here at 11 o'clock. He'll have the latest update for you on this story. Have a good night.